On a completely fluffy note, I'm going to be talking about accidentally making science fiction generators by making art generators. I worked on a game called Spore. I made the planets. So that was intentionally making generators to make science fiction possible by creating new planets with new rules. I make a lot of other generators. Here's a dress generator on the right. This is part of my project to make the first ever fashion magazine by bots for bots. I also make recipe generators, story generators, fire generators, sock generators, and a lot of things that don't actually fit on this slide at all. This is not a talk about how to actually build one of these. If you want to know how to build one of these, I have an article that people online have found very helpful. It's called So You Want to Build a Generator, and I encourage you to go read that about how to actually build a generator for stuff. All right, but I just lied. Here's a little bit about how to make a generator. On Spore, we used to call this an artist in a box. So you take the mind of an artist, all the rules that they have about making art, or that a mixologist has about making drinks, and you somehow put those into a box that when you push the button, it'll make an art. So you have additive rules, things like, how is this thing constructed? Like, what are the new features that it's going to need? How am I going to start putting this thing together? Giving it features, basically expanding the possibility space. And then you have subtractive rules, where you take your possibility space and you lop off all the bits that aren't good. And there are usually a lot of things that aren't good. So what this is really about is rules. Taking the mind of an artist and coming up with rules that are able to make art, or whatever you're generating. If you have really good rules about whatever it is you're modeling, art or socks or nature, you end up with a perfectly harmonious model of the world where everything is balanced and works just as it does in reality. But of course, that's quite dull. So we should make science fiction, where we take the nice rules that we've made and we now start stretching them, and you can run them in reverse like Deep Dream does. If you have a nice little warp between 0 and 1, you can go beyond that. And often, if you set up your constraints with certain expectations, it gets weirder. So here's one that I made. I was making a flower generator. Sorry for the slightly bad GIFs, but where I was like, OK, the flowers are going to grow outwards and then make stuff. And I started adding in sort of curvature for the flower stems, and that started looking kind of interesting. I got a little bit wackier with the forces. I started making forces that would not actually naturally apply to the flowers. So they have like strange wandering forces. Now the petals have weird forces. Now everything just has lots of noise forces sort of pushing it into various squiggly directions. So yeah, a system of rules that can create a logic that is alien to our own. That's science fiction, or a definition of science fiction, or it's a really good procedure to get science fiction. This is one of my favorite ever prototypes. It makes weird science fiction flowers that you can procedurally evolve. You can do this sort of thing with movement. You can script fantastical simulations for movement, like gravity exists, but what about wiggle? Is wiggle a force that you should apply? It can be. Like, write your own bizarre logics for what it is that particle simulations do. Realistic rendering. A lot of people in this room probably use Unity. You can write your own from scratch and have it work badly in different interesting ways. So a lot of mine, I never erase the back buffer, and I just keep drawing on top of it. You can also interact with stuff in weird ways and kind of get strange emergent behaviors through interaction. This is somebody doing ballet. That's not mine, but that's a squishy touch screen that I made with spandex and a Kinect, and you can mash your face into it, which you should be able to do with all interfaces. You can have emergent systems where you make some interesting shape or form or set of patterns, and then you apply different things to them, and that sort of multiplies together. So I was trying to make bots, or like little interesting bots, and I made things that followed them. And anyway, so this is a ragdoll simulator I made. This was something that I was trying to be realistic. I was trying to make a ragdoll, but without any inverse kinematics, because those are tiresome. And then I started applying forces to the joints. And so the one on the bottom, so imagine that you have a sentient tribble that is attached to your wrist, and every time it hears a bass beat, it jumps up. And you can start making dances with this and applying it to different parts, or different forces, or wiggle force on the hips, or wiggle force on the arms. I made a jazz hands force that just does this. Another science fiction, this is actually the project that inspired the previous one. This is lazy rule making a polyamory simulator. These are little ragdolls that fall in love, and when they fall in love with somebody, their hands reach out to grab other people. I forgot you have 2 hands. You can make arbitrarily long polyamorous chains. You can make rules that make rules. I made a language generator with this tool called Tracery that I made, which generates rules that generate languages and then generates poetry and dialogue in those languages, and art. This is a plug for this language that I made called tracery. I have zines about it. This is what I use for a lot of my generators. If anybody wants to play around with this, let me know. I'm happy to teach. So yeah, I think that's my talk.